You've probably had your blood sugar tested. You may have even been told your glucose is normal. But here's the truth. By the time your blood sugar is high, you're already metabolically sick for years. Blood sugar is not the root problem. It's not the underlying cause. The real culprit, the one hormone almost no doctor tests, is insulin. And until we start measuring and treating insulin resistance, we will continue to fail at reversing obesity, diabetes, and chronic disease. This episode is your wake-up call because once you understand what insulin does and what happens when it goes unchecked, everything about your health will start to make sense. So let's dive right in. Welcome back to episode 54 of the Obesity Project. My name is Dr. Mark Schenkman. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're talking about insulin being the root cause of obesity. So let me tell you about a patient that I know named Michelle. Michelle was 38 years old. She wasn't obese, maybe 15 pounds overweight. She had a stressful job, didn't sleep all that great, and started gaining belly fat even though she was eating healthy and walking every single day. Labs, well, her fasting glucose was 95, her A1C about 5.4%. And the doctor said she was fine, but she really wasn't. She was crashing after meals. She was always hungry. She was constantly tired. Does this sound familiar? And that fat around her waist, it kept growing. So what her doctor didn't check was her fasting insulin. And when her doctor finally did get around to testing it after we had a conversation and she inquired for her doctor to test it, it was found to be 22. That's over 3 times what it should be. And Michelle wasn't lazy. She wasn't broken. She was insulin resistant. And no one had told her, not her doctor. She had no concept of it. And so that's what we're going to fix today. We're going to talk about this. So what is insulin? We got to start at the basics. So most people think of insulin as a diabetes drug, but insulin is one of our natural hormones. It's a hormone of energy storage. And when you eat, especially carbs, that insulin level begins to rise. Its job is to move nutrients into cells and stop you from burning fat. It's a storage hormone, so it's telling you to store that energy for later use. So it doesn't want to burn the fat now. It doesn't want to burn the sugar now. It wants us to store that energy. So in an ideal world, insulin rises, does its job, but then falls. However, in our modern world, with constant snacking, ultra-processed refined foods, and zero fasting, insulin stays high all the time. And when insulin stays high, you stay in fat storage mode, in hunger mode, and in inflammation mode. That's why people can be gaining fat even after eating fewer calories. So insulin is the signal that overrides the math, the calories in, calories out model. It doesn't just regulate blood sugar. It does so much more than that. It has hundreds of active processes, but primarily it regulates energy storage, fat metabolism, inflammation, and even aging. So here's what happens when insulin is elevated for years upon years. So first you store more visceral fat, and visceral fat is the dangerous kind of fat. It's the central fat that compresses our organs. So it stores it viscerally, not just under the skin, but around your liver, your pancreas, and other abdominal organs, and prevents them from functioning properly. Then next, your hunger hormones break down. So leptin, your fullness hormone, or kind of ghrelin is the hunger hormone. So leptin is sort of the fullness hormone. So leptin stops working. It develops leptin resistance. Your cells develop leptin resistance. Your ghrelin, your hunger hormone, stays very, very high. And you eat, but you never feel satisfied. Your cells ultimately become numb to the effects of insulin. And this is insulin resistance. It forces your pancreas to work overtime. And eventually, after the compensatory mechanisms begin to break down and you can no longer drive that glucose into the cells, no longer store any more fat as fuel, the blood sugar begins to rise. But by that point, the damage is already done. And studies show that fasting insulin can be elevated for 10 to 15 years before your glucose levels, your blood glucose, begins to rise. High insulin is linked to things like obesity and PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, fatty liver, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and even cancer. And let's face it, this is not controversial. This just isn't talked about because we don't measure it. You can't talk about something you cannot measure. It's, as an analogy, it's like watching a house burn for a decade or more, but only reacting when the roof finally collapses in. So the obvious question is, why aren't we testing insulin regularly? Well, there's basically three reasons primarily, and then I'll give you a host of other reasons. But first of all, and probably the biggest one, medical training does not emphasize it. In medical school, doctors are taught to track glucose, prescribe drugs, and manage numbers. They're not taught to ask why they're off in the first place. They don't think about the root cause. You see a symptom, you treat a symptom, and blood glucose rising is merely a symptom. So that's number one. Number two, insurance doesn't reimburse for prevention. And that ultimately is the problem with Western medicine. We don't focus on prevention. We see symptoms, we diagnose, and then we treat with medications. So insurance doesn't reimburse for prevention. There is absolutely no billing code in the ICD-10, the medical billing manual that provides the codes that doctors use for catching insulin resistance early. There's no billing code for that. But there are plenty of codes for insulin, for statins, for metformin, and bariatric surgery like gastric bypass surgery. So the third major reason is big food and big pharma have zero incentives to focus on insulin. The very foods that spike insulin are highly profitable. Big food makes a fortune on us spiking our glucose and spiking our insulin as well. And the medications that treat those symptoms are billion-dollar industries. So there's just no financial incentive for big food or big pharma that directly influence the medical profession to come up with solutions and investigate insulin resistance and rising insulin levels before they actually create problems in the blood sugar levels. So this system is not designed to reverse chronic disease. It's simply designed to manage it. And it's designed to manage it profitably and for life. But here's the really good news, is you don't need a prescription to lower insulin. What you need is better information and a concrete plan. So here's what actually works. Here's how you treat insulin resistance. So you need to stop spiking insulin all day long. So you need to ditch those frequent snacks. You need to focus on eating 2 to 3 real meals, whole food meals per day. And you need to think about introducing time-restricted eating. Maybe start with a simple 12-12. Eat for 12 hours, fast for 12 hours. I mean, 8 of those hours you're sleeping anyway. How hard is that? Not really that difficult. Or move into like a 14-10 or even a 16-8. Secondly, we need to eliminate the ultra-processed carbohydrates. So no more refined grains, Grains, no more refined grains, sugar-laden health foods, or energy bars pretending to be nutrition, undercover nutrition. We need to begin to prioritize protein and not fear fat. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient, and fat doesn't spike insulin, especially when it's paired with protein. The protein and the fat come together. There's virtually no food out there where protein and fat are not linked together. And when they are separated from each other, they're not as useful, they're not as beneficial. And we need to use carbs strategically. And we need to get them from whole foods like sweet potatoes or berries or squash, not juice, sugary cereals or granola. And timing absolutely matters. Eat your carbs when insulin sensitivity is higher, such as after physical activity or strength training. And then finally, we want to build muscle. Muscle is the most insulin sensitive tissue. It is a huge sink for blood glucose, and strength training is insulin therapy without a prescription. So this isn't about dieting. It's about giving your hormones new instructions. The hormones, I'm sorry, the food is actually direction to our body on what to do with it. And if you're eating the right kind of food, you're getting the right message. If you're eating the wrong foods, you're giving your body the wrong message, right? So obesity, not a character flaw. It's not a lack of effort or a lack of discipline like I've spoken about in the last 2 to 3 videos. It is simply a hormonal disorder driven by a food and a medical system that ignores insulin. They're looking at type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance through the wrong lens, through the lens of blood sugar and not through the lens of rising insulin levels. So you're not broken. You're not lazy. You've just never been taught the real cause or the real solution. And if your doctor has never tested your insulin, that doesn't mean you're healthy. It just means no one's looked upstream. They're always looking downstream. What happens, to your cholesterol, and does that lead to heart disease, and does that lead to cancer and all this other stuff? But no one's looking upstream. No one's looking at your insulin levels rising for years upon years upon years before these chronic illnesses actually develop. So make sure that your doctor begins to look upstream. Have a conversation with your doctor saying, hey, how come nobody's looking at my insulin levels? And am I insulin resistant? There's tests that you can do for that. So once we start looking at the right metrics, then we can treat in the right way. And we can primarily treat with diet and the foods we introduce to our body. So in the next episode of the Obesity Project, we'll be diving into the truth about fat and why you should stop fearing the most misunderstood macronutrient and how the war on fat helped to create the modern obesity crisis. So until then, stop managing symptoms, start fixing the signal, and reclaim your metabolism from the inside out. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification for more upcoming videos. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Like, share, and comment, and let's spread the word. Let's get the word out. I'm all about educating people and really spreading the message that we can treat many of these things without medications, without expensive doctor visits, where we can just focus on diet and exercise and move the needle in the right direction. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.